Public anger, protest votes and political paralysis in Italy. A dramatic election fails to produce an outright winner, and now sworn enemies must consider working together to avoid more economic woes. The Italian elections revisited. This is Inside Story. Hello again everyone, I'm Kamal Santamaria. If during the course of this program you start to get a sense of déjà vu, don't worry, it is completely intentional. Because 3 days ago on Inside Story we previewed the Italian elections. And now the results are in and there's perhaps even more uncertainty than there was then. We've assembled the same panel we had on Sunday, and I will reintroduce them to you in a moment, to see if our assumptions were correct and to think about where Italy goes from here. Because what we've got is an angry backlash over austerity measures which has thrown Italy into political turmoil. Tired of the same old politics, and perhaps politicians as well, Italians have instead thrown their support behind the grassroots campaign of the one-time comedian Pier-Virgilio. His five-star movement's become the largest single party in the country by campaigning on a non-party platform. Here's how the results broke down in Italy's two political chambers. We'll run you through them. First, the Chamber of Deputies, the lower house, with 630 seats. The centre-left grouping of Pierluigi Bersani, just over 29% of the vote, but in doing so gained a huge advantage because, to make sure the largest party gains a majority, it automatically gets 340 seats if it has less than 55% of the vote. Silvio Berlusconi's centre-right coalition just 0.4% behind, and so gets 124 seats as a direct proportion to the number of votes. Pier-Virgilio's five-star movement, we talked about that. It becomes the biggest single party with just over 25%, 108 seats. But this is the telling figure. The centrist coalition of the former Prime Minister Mario Monti, just 10% of the vote, 45 seats is what he gets. Quickly then through the Senate as well, the upper house, 315 seats there. Bersani's coalition, 31% of the vote, 113 seats. Berlusconi's 12-party bloc, 30%, but gets 116 seats because of a regional bonus. Grillo's five-star movement, 23% and 54 seats, and Monti's bloc with its 9% and 18 seats. So those are the numbers. Our returning panel discussion in a moment. First, though, the story from the ballot box with Hazem Sika.
3 leaders, no clear winner, one nervous continent. Italy's election results have thrown up plenty of questions, and for now, no real answers. The lack of a clear victor has already sent financial markets plunging around the world, wondering what direction Italy's next Prime Minister will take the Eurozone's third biggest economy. Pier-Luigi Bersani looks like the man in the driving seat. His centre-left coalition has won the lower house, but no party has taken the upper house. Silvio Berlusconi's centre-right coalition did better than expected. He may be tainted by scandal, but the former Prime Minister could be a key player, with his bloc now the second biggest in the upper chamber. Then there's the wild card, comedian-turned-politician Pier-Virgilio, whose five-star movement rode a wave of voter disgust at the country's political establishment. No one's laughing at him now. Grillo's bloc of seats could be decisive in forming a working government.
They talk about coalitions. They are finished. The story is finished. Another story will start. Why do you continue with the story of coalitions? It's finished. There is nothing left. There is war between generations, where 77-year-old people keep on struggling to rule the country. They are sick.
What's clear enough is the voters' sound rejection of a man they never elected. Technocrat Prime Minister Mario Monti's centre coalition got a poor showing in both houses.
It is too early to consider any solution, nor does it rest upon me to find one. But right now I consider it essential that there's maximum transparency between the political forces, because we are all faced with a very serious responsibility. The government must ensure transparency for the country.
But Italy has the highest national debt level in the Eurozone after Greece, and Monti's radical programme of tax increases and spending cuts won praise from European leaders. After several months of relative calm, investors and governments alike fear a return to instability if Italy turns its back on austerity measures already taken. The next few weeks could be filled with backroom dealing. as the politicians scramble to form a viable coalition. If they can't, then new elections will be called, and the question of who should govern Italy will go back to the ballot box. Hazem Sika, Inside Story.
So, for what we are pretty sure is a first in over 6 years of producing Inside Story, let me reintroduce the same panel who joined us for our pre-election discussion. In Rome, Pier-Virgilio d'Astoli, he is the president of the European movement in Italy. In London, Alberto Nardelli, an Italian affairs analyst. And in Washington, D.C., Thomas Pally, senior economic policy advisor to the American Federation of Labor and the Congress of Industrial Organizations. Gentlemen, welcome back. Very nice to have you with us. The first thing I did when we decided we were going to do this show again effectively, or reboot it as it were, was to go back and watch the last show and think about what we said, what you all said, and what sort of things we were thinking about and predicting before this election. And what I'm going to do now, it's a little bit cruel, but I'm going to play back some of the things which you three gentlemen said on that show on Sunday before the election. So let's start in London with Alberto Nardelli. This is what you had to say in our show on Sunday.
I think people will definitely think about the last 15 months and will definitely think that things could have been a lot worse, which is probably why the centre-right and Silvio Berlusconi's party won't do too well in the polls.
You've got a little smile on your face there, Alberto, talking about Berlusconi not doing well. He's back like the proverbial phoenix from the ashes. He just keeps doing it.
I think if you look at the numbers, though, Silvio Berlusconi's party did as polled. The impact of that number is much bigger because of the way the Senate regional voting system works. The big story is the collapse in centre-left support and how that flowed to Beppe Grillo. Because if you actually look at the numbers, Berlusconi was predicted to get about 28-30% of the votes, which is more or less what he got. What happened is the big collapse in centre-left support and the rise of Beppe Grillo. I think that's what caused the outcome in terms of seats.
And the other thing you said also about Silvio Berlusconi was the fact that I think the way you put it was as his strength, and this is going back many years, his strength is always in the weakness of others. So that can skew things a little bit as well.
Absolutely. I think one of the key points that I was trying to make last time was that the Italian public is tired with mainstream political parties. On the centre-right, that's embodied within Silvio Berlusconi, but on the centre-left, it's embodied within a very similar type of leadership, very similar types of policy proposals, which have been represented every time for the past 15 years. And I think this election has fundamentally refuted those two mainstream propositions.
Okay, Pier-Virgilio d'Astoli in Rome, welcome back to you as well. Let's have a little bit of a listen to some of your predictions which you made on Sunday's show.
Generally speaking, the big majority of the Italians will be for a change. That means that all the voters that will vote, for example, for Grillo, they express they will for a change. And generally speaking, left is for a change. But very probably left will not have the majority of the seats in the parliament.
So, Pier, you were talking about people voting for Beppe Grillo. In the end, are you surprised at the amount of support that he got and what a crucial player he will now be?
No, I think that the result confirmed what I said. The majority, big majority of the Italians want a change and want also change at European level. We have a third of the people that follow the populist anti-European approach of Silvio Berlusconi. We have the center of Mario Monti that accept more or less the Europe as it is. And now we have a possible alliance between the center-left and Grillo, because these two blocks want a new kind of Europe. So I think that Europe have to pay attention to the result of the Italian elections. Bersani said yesterday that he wants to discuss with Grillo about which kind of reform they can agree together. And I think that in this framework we have also the possibility to play a new role at European level. I think that it's not correct what some newspapers said yesterday, that the big majority of the Italians are anti-European. The big majority of the Italians wanted a different kind of Europe, not a Europe of austerity, but a Europe that could help the countries to have another kind of prosperity. And I think that all the protests that we see in Europe, in Bulgaria, in Spain, in Greece, and now in Italy, show that the Europe have to pay attention to this kind of situation.
Thomas Pally in Washington, D.C. He comes from an economics background, and that's what a lot of we talked about on Sunday. Let's have a listen now.
I see a protest politics developing. I don't yet see a constructive prosperity politics developing. And if that, I think, is the critique of the social democratic parties and center-left parties throughout Europe. For the time being, they're allied with the status quo, and I do think that status quo is going to win out politically this time round.
So protest politics you talked about, and quite right, because that we could talk about in association with Pier-Virgilio, but then you talk about not seeing a constructive prosperity politics developing. You could even argue that the reintroduction, if you like, of democracy into Italy after 15 months is what's not proving constructive. Things were perhaps potentially more constructive, for the economy at least, under a technocrat government.
No, I would disagree there. That's the first point I'd like to make this morning, is that what is bad for financial markets is not necessarily bad for country and people. Often what's good, financial markets like things that are not good for people, all too often, sadly. Now that gets to the real essence of this election, which is the significance of Pier-Virgilio. And I think his significance runs far beyond Italy. It speaks to a lot of the politics that is developing throughout Europe. To help viewers understand that, what they must realize is that both parties, the governing parties in Italy, are not giving what voters want. Mr. Berlusconi and the centre-right is just not credible, and Mr. Monti and Mr. Bersani of the technocrats and centre-left are offering more of the same austerity and stagnation. So voters have gone elsewhere. Some just didn't vote, and others went and voted for Mr. Grillo's five-star movement party.
Okay, so put that, if you
so
would,
therefore,
sorry, and you may be getting to this point actually, but put that into an economic context for me, because the one thing which markets and anyone involved in finance doesn't like is instability, and that is what this election has thrown up. And also when you introduce a personality like Pier-Virgilio, who doesn't come from an economic or political background, surely that brings in more uncertainty again.
Well, yes, from the financial market standpoint, it is uncertainty, and the markets reacted accordingly. But let's take it back to the politics. Pier-Virgilio's emergence can be both a good and a bad force. It will be a good force if it shocks European politicians into trying to move to what I call prosperity economics. So that obviously applies to Mr. Bersani, but even more it applies to Germany. I hope Mrs. Merkel and Mr. Steinbrück, the two candidates for Chancellor, are watching what's going on, because we've seen in Italy this emergence now of this fracturing and fraying of politics, and unusual political forces beginning to emerge. And by the way, we've seen that also in Greece with the rise of the fascist party, Golden Dawn. You've seen it in Hungary. The Jobbik party is a national figure. You're seeing it in France. The right is stronger. And you're also seeing it in Germany, where I mentioned before about the pirate party, which I think of as the politics of cabaret. But it's still that politics of protest. And Europe does not have a good history when that develops. We have to think back to the 1930s here. And so that's what I'm hoping European politicians are seeing, how dangerous this tendency is. If they respond right, it's a good thing. If they do nothing about it and they continue with this austerity status quo, then you are unleashing very dangerous political forces in Europe.
Okay then, let's talk about Mario Monti. Poor old Mario Monti, who actually, when I watched back Sunday's programme, I noticed I was probably quite sympathetic towards him and what he did in his 15 months. But let's talk to Pier-Virgilio d'Astoli in Rome about Mario Monti. I mean, he really did. I guess it's not surprising in that people didn't like austerity, but I mean, the work that he's done over the last 15 months seems to be just forgotten about now.
But the result of Monti is very bad. So, as you say, the people don't agree about this approach that Monti said some months ago that it's not possible to make together the austerity and the growth. He said we have to start with austerity and then only after we can think about the growth. I think that is not correct. I think that the approach of the center-left party is that we can make the two things together. And I think that eventually, if Pier-Luigi Bersani will be the new head of the government, he could discuss with the German government saying that we can to follow the two things together. First, of course, we need to put in order our financial system, but at the same time we can develop some growth politics at European level. And I think from this point of view it will be a new kind of relationship between Italy and Germany.
Alberto, in London, what do you think about Mario Monti's polling and I guess his future now? I mean, was he even kidding himself in the first place to run in this election when he wasn't elected in the first place and his policies were perhaps effective but unpopular?
Well, I think austerity and Monti's policies again only explain half the story, because while it's true that they were incredibly unpopular, I think that politically Mario Monti's probably biggest mistake was to create an alliance with two very seasoned politicians and two seasoned political parties. So once again, it needs to be read within the context of the old political establishment, because once Monti on one hand is saying we needed a new approach, a more serious politics, but then creates those alliances, that credibility which he built comes less. And so does the trust that people may have had towards him in the months during which he was in power. In terms of what happens next for Mario Monti, I think he's quite a irrelevant figure right now within the political spectrum of possibilities.
Right. Let's start talking coalitions then. Actually, why don't I stay with you while I've got you, Alberto? How do you see this playing out? Is it going to be just this horribly long, drawn-out process which no one wants?
I think it will take some time to create alliances, and I think the challenge is that there are so many different possible scenarios, because while the centre-left, it seems, are more keen to try and create an alliance with the five-star movement, from a five-star movement perspective, and Grillo has made this clear, they don't want to create alliances. If they stood on a platform of anti-politics and then create a coalition, they will lose that support. But they have said, they have kept the door slightly opening by saying that they will look at issues on a case-by-case basis. On the other hand, I think an alliance between the centre-left and the centre-right would be probably very toxic for the centre-left, because lots of centre-left supporters and party members, their whole career has been based on being anti-Berlusconi. Creating that alliance will create a collapse in their support. I think there are two key issues which need to be kept in mind when looking at the possible alliances. The first is, whatever happens, this parliament has to elect a new president of the republic, because without a president of the republic, you wouldn't be able to have future elections if these need to take place in a relatively short period of time. And I think that is a fundamental key element which needs to be kept in mind in terms of what could happen next.
Pier-Virgilio, I think Alberto made a very good point there when he talked about Beppe Grillo and the five-star movement, in that they ran on non-politics. And yet, if they are going to become involved and use the political capital which they have now, they have to become politicians.
Yeah, now, of course, they, as from London, he said the first step that is very important to see how will be the approach of the Beppe Grillo party concerning the election of the President of the Republic. And from this point of view, I think that there is an important choice to make. I agree on the fact that Italy will need, for the first time, eventually a woman in the Quirinale. And I think that Beppe Grillo could agree eventually to support the candidature of Emma Bonino. Emma Bonino could be the best leader in Italy to put together the approach of Beppe Grillo and the approach of the center-left. Emma Bonino could be the bridge between the center-left and the Grillo approach.
Thomas Pally, your thoughts on potential coalitions now? And again, I think, we kind of keep coming back to Beppe Grillo, but I think he's just such an interesting character because of the platform that he ran on and I think the changes he would have to make if he comes into a position of power.
Well, I agree with what your two speakers have just said about the very great difficulty of coalition politics at this stage. And I think actually it's probably the wrong way to go. Mr. Grillo, if he forms a coalition, gets tainted, as did Mr. Monti, of being really part of the system that he's run against. And Mr. Bersani, if he forms a coalition with Berlusconi, gets tainted for having made a deal with the devil, as it were. So I think the way to go is for Mr. Bersani to form a minority government and then try with the minority government to tilt the program towards growth. And that gets to the key economics here. Italy's future, Italy's possibilities of growth are in the hands of Europe. But on the other hand, Europe's future is to a degree in the hands of Italy. And that's the card that has to be played very intelligently, and it has to have a listening, helpful ear from other European capitals, particularly Paris and Berlin.
We're starting to run down the clock, gentlemen. So a few final thoughts. Alberto Nardelli, I'll come back to you again. This is, I will admit, absolute crystal ball gazing, but do we have to possibly consider the idea of another vote? The fact that, as you've all pointed out, coalition politics is going to be difficult and that this possibly in one way or another might have to go back to the people? Is that possible?
I think a very quick point on the possibility of a minority government, because that is one of the potential outcomes. One of the complexities in Italy with such a scenario is that whichever government wants to come into power, it needs to be supported by a parliamentary majority. So even a minority government will need to have the support of a majority of parliament because of the constitution. In terms of the early vote, that is definitely a possible scenario, but because we need to see which alliances are created, a president needs to be in place, and there is a PD, Democratic Party leadership issue at this point, because if Bersani doesn't form the government, I don't think he will be able to stand in an election. So even if an election were to have to be repeated, I don't think we'll see one before the next 12 months at least, because of these three issues.
Pier-Virgilio, what are your thoughts on either minority government or possibly another vote?
I think that one possibility is to follow as we say in Italy, the Sicilian model. In Sicily, a center-left candidate was elected, and the Grillo party in Sicily is supporting the government in Sicily. So I think that that could be a model, a government not with the Grillo party, because I think that the members of the parliament of the Grillo party will not accept to be part of the government, but they could support a government of a certain left following some policies that could realize a kind of convergence with Grillo. I think, for example, the question of the public goods, there is a lot of things concerning the public goods in which you can find a convergence between the center-left and Grillo, or some reform of the state in the public administration, and of course also a kind of new approach concerning our relationship with Europe.
Gentlemen, I said it on Sunday, I'll say it again. Absolutely fascinating, these Italian elections, and wonderful to have all three of you back on the show again. Pier-Virgilio d'Astoli in Rome, Alberto Nardelli in London, and Thomas Pally in Washington, D.C. Thank you, gentlemen. And thank you, our viewers, once again for joining us for this rebooted edition of Inside Story. If you want to send your feedback, please do. InsideStory@aljazeera.net is our email address. I'm Kamal Santamaria from the whole team. Thanks for watching. See you again soon.